Anyway.
Eric, we got a question here. It says, are we going to kick this off with the music that usually starts with the Lancaster Farming Podcast?
Yes. Yes, we are. So, welcome to the show today. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today we're going to listen to a webinar that we recorded live last week. It was an FAQ about Autoflower with Joe Ullman, Steve Groff, and Ryan Power. If some of those names sound familiar, it's because 2/3 of these guests have been on the show before, but we'll do introductions in a couple of minutes. Today's show is all about autoflower varieties. We go through a big list of questions, and then we turn it over to some questions from the live audience, and hopefully we paint a much fuller picture for you about autoflower. All right, you ready? Here we go. So today we have an expert panel here to answer questions about autoflowering cannabis. So let's do some quick introductions, and then we'll get started. So first, Steve Groff. Let's have a little introduction, please.
Thank you, Eric, and appreciate everybody who joined today. I'm a farmer from southeastern Pennsylvania, Lancaster County to be exact. And kind of what makes me unique is I do all no-till. I do not till my soil, and I have very intensive use of cover crops and an intricate cropping system. Last year was the first that Pennsylvania was legal to grow hemp, so I dove right in and planted 23 acres of transplants and 47 acres of direct seeded. Let's just say that the transplants worked pretty good, and I learned a lot from the direct seeding, mainly with genetics, okay? So that's important. So I run an educational aspect of the Hemp Innovators, which is a weekly webinar that I do. And basically, I don't consider myself a seasoned expert, but I'm a learner, and I like to associate myself with people who want to learn as well. So we learn together. So hempinnovators.com if you want to check that out.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Next up is Joe Ullman.
Yes, thanks, Eric. Joe Ullman here. I'm the head breeder of the CBD division of Atlas Seed, located here in southeastern Pennsylvania. We are bringing autoflowering CBD genetics to the market this year for the first year. Excited to be working with Steve on his farm, doing some direct seeding trials, and just learning and associating together. And let's turn it over to Ryan.
All right. Next up is Ryan Power.
Thanks. All right. Yeah, I'm Ryan Power, run New Family Farm in California. Got about 3 years of experience farming autoflowering cannabis, mostly THC varieties. And I'm a co-owner of Atlas Seed along with Joe, and do a lot of breeding, research, and development.
All right, great. Okay, so the basic format here is I'll ask questions, and then you guys will answer them. And then when we get through my list of questions, if there are any questions from the audience, we'll ask those too. Okay. Let's get going. So, what is the difference between autoflowering genetics and normal clone or full-term varieties? Who wants to take that? Joe?
I'll take that first. Basically, in short, full-term varieties are called photoperiod varieties. They will go from a vegetative state to a flowering state when the sunlight gets low enough. They start to flower when the days get shorter. That's usually in August, and then they're harvested in late September and through October. Autoflowering varieties are day neutral. They do not have a photo response to the day length. They have we'll say an internal clock where from emergence to harvest is generally we'll say 65 to 85 days roughly, depending on strain. They're fantastic for production ag because you can, set your clock and your field production out to a little more detailed timing.
Can you take cuttings and make clones from autoflowers?
No.
Well, why is that?
They will try to flower and die if you try to take clones.
Okay. Interesting. So what can people expect in terms of the feminization rate of autoflower genetics in general and Atlas seed genetics specifically?
We have typically very high feminization rates. We work with labs to certify seed lots, and it's up around 99.9%.
Yeah, be like one in, we see them anywhere between 1 in 1,100 up to 1 in 2,500 males, so one male per 1,100 plants or one male per 2,500 plants. Those males still have to be removed from the field, which we call roguing. And that's a very important process that we really stress our growers to take seriously, and we try to provide them with the most amount of information that they possibly could use in order to make sure they get every male.
Ryan, is there something you want to add to that?
So autoflowers are particularly prone to stress events, and as are all cannabis plants. And you plant a much higher density per acre of autoflower plants as they are smaller than photoperiod. And so we're talking about, 17,000 plants, and a lot of growers are used to maybe growing 100 or a couple hundred. And so it's just a different game, and it's a different scale. And what Joe said is true. We provide as much information as we can to growers to spot males out there, because even with the 99.9% feminization rate, depending on field conditions or other factors, you might see some more herms.
So when can growers expect the auto plants to begin the flowering cycle?
So that is, we've been finding this year with some growers out here in California who planted in February, that flowering didn't initiate until day 40 to 50. So it does appear to be climate influence, but in general, between day 21 to day 30 of their lives is when you'll see the beginning of pistil formation.
Okay.
I would say, sorry, Eric, that would be for THC specific, and in our CBD varieties, it's a little bit later. I've seen 23 to 35 days from sowing, depending on strain. But again, also very much affected by stress events.
When is the best time to plant autoflowering varieties?
Early spring, so that you can have a harvest in early summer when the price is high. Yeah.
Now, I will say this. That's true. Absolutely. That's the beauty of autoflowers, being able to take advantage of that mid-season lack of production with the photoperiod genetics not being ready for harvest yet. But we're finding with our direct seeding trials that we've been doing with Steve in this early spring, soil temperature is a really important factor here. And we're seeing seeds really starting to thrive at soil temps above 70 degrees. We'll say this, starting to come up above 70 degrees. At 65 and lower, we're not seeing anything come up. And we know from our greenhouse trials, 80-degree soil temps are really fantastic. We're really getting, 94% emergence up and out of the soil. So I think big picture, you want to wait till the temperature is warm enough if you're doing it outside, which in some places could be late May, even early June. If you're in a greenhouse or a high tunnel, you can push it up a lot earlier. Steve, do you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, I think we're still going to learn. And from my background in even other plant species, there is sometimes significant variance between varieties or between selections. And it has to do even with seed quality sometimes. And I think as we continue to go more the direct seeding route, we will soon find out that there'll be characteristics and traits to be able to be more consistent to plant earlier into colder temperatures. For instance, here on my farm, I had some of my acreage got seeded last year. Now, this wasn't autoflower I'm talking about right now, but we actually saw emergence in March, which is pretty cold. The soil temperature is only in the 40s. And so maybe that was that variety. I don't know. But most of the breeding has been concentrated on the end use characteristics, the level of CBD content or THC content. But as this industry matures, we'll start to see more efforts go into the front end of that, not only with the quality of seed, but the ability of seed to germinate under more cooler conditions. So hemp has historically been a more of a warm season crop grown in more warm season areas. I know of some genetics in Ukraine, fiber genetics, that they say at any time the temperature is 45 degrees, and that is Fahrenheit, they're planting. So whether or not we can adapt that much to that degree, I'll say, with autoflowers, I don't know. But I would say this is something that the industry will be probably paying attention to, and a good project for you, Joe, to start identify, well, where is the cold tolerance? Because that could be a marketing edge at some point.
Yeah.
Let's talk about plant spacing. What are some of the most common plant spacings for autoflowering varieties?
Brian?
Yeah, that is definitely region specific. When you're mitigating factors like mold pressure or humidity or wind. But right now we're finding that a higher planting density is working better. And so we're at 17,000 to 20,000 plants per acre. And that's all in 30-inch rows across the field and between 10 and 12 inches in row spacing.
Okay.
So one of the things we're going to be doing this year, my farm, is to do some research on that. I mean, we're hearing some reports out there of some autoflower genetics planted up to 27,000 plants per acre. The seeding density has been very much suppressed because of the cost of the seeds. It just simply wasn't economical to justify high seeding rates. But I think it's common knowledge as we move forward here with the industry, the cost of seed production is probably going to go down. And it would be nice to know, and we're going to do some of that research, what is the ideal seeding rate? So we'll be testing this in small plots just to see where that may be. So there's a concern about high density, especially in the east here and higher moisture conditions. We're going to get more disease pressure where you don't have the airflow. But on the flip side, one of the benefits of higher density or closer rows spaced out or maybe equal distance spacing, if we could, is the benefit of weed control, because these plants grow rather quickly and they can suppress weeds. So there's pros and cons to plant density, and that's some of I think we're going to start to fine tune that in the coming years ahead. And this year we hope to learn a lot on that regard.
Okay, thanks, Steve. How about transplanting autoflower varieties? Do they do well as transplants?
Yes, they do. We know that model works very well, and that's what we've recommended all of our growers officially try and use and implement this year. We know that the future of it's direct seeding, to at least on the hemp side of this cannabis equation, to lower the cost of production. We did some last year, and we did some with Steve last year, and we saw results that were promising enough for us to dive a lot deeper this year into that. But definitely transplants work for sure. One key thing with transplanting autoflowers is you don't want to let the plant get root bound in its cell. We recommend using a floating medium. The most common thing that we've used is Ellie pots. It's a plug with a biodegradable wrapper around it. There's other things. Grow coons are a new thing. Basically allows you to pop the plug out within about 14 days of sowing, when there's only a 1 or 2 or maybe 3 roots showing, and then put it into the ground with the transplanter. It's very important not to go, let's say, 4 weeks in a small little cell before you put them out. you'll see early flowering, early triggering, and you'll be disappointed with a smaller yield on your plant.
And we touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about direct seeding autoflowers?
Well, I guess I'll take that, and then you can clean up there, Joe, or whoever. Obviously, for commercial production, direct seeding is it's certainly something that is very intriguing. It's the way I'm used to planting things. The cost of transplant is higher. It's cost to grow them and everything. The trick is, can you successfully put the seeds in the ground and have a high enough germination rate doing that to be worthwhile? Because one of the benefits of transplanting is you only plant the seeds that grew, and pretty easy to transplant and have almost 100% growth in that. When you direct seed, you can't account for a few that will not germinate. You never get 100% germination of every single seed. And then with the equipment that we have equipment that's able to do this. It's been perfected, but not with hemp. And so there's some adaptations that need to occur. And it literally took me days to get my planter outfitted to plant hemp. Now with what I know, I could tell another farmer, this is the kind of plates you need to singulate the seed and all the details. So we figured that part out, and that stuff is available. But the other challenge about hemp is it's a very shallow seeded seed, and it's a small seed. And that can make it a little bit more difficult. You can take a corn seed, for instance. It's a large seed. You plant it 2 inches deep, it grows. If it's 1.5 inches, it's fine. If it's 2 1/4, it's not that big of a deal. But with hemp, autoflower hemp, you almost have to have it in that 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch depth, depending on several variables. So to have the right machinery, the right planter to do that is a challenge right now. But farmers who have planters that are capable of planting corn or soybeans, those planters can be retrofitted. So it's not like you have to buy a brand new planter to plant hemp. You just have to know how to retrofit it.
Anything to add, Joe?
No, that's very good. I like that.
Okay, what's the most optimal feeding plan that you recommend for autoflowering plants?
Yeah, so that's going to depend a lot on your available nutrients in the soil, in the soil report you get pre-planting. But in general, we recommend that our growers use a crop management consultant or work with a crop advisor and agronomist for these decisions. We are taking leaf samples weekly to determine the nutrient requirements of our crop this year. But in general, a general statement about that would be that people who are used to growing cannabis, it's a months-long journey, and there's distinct phases of vegetation, vegetative growth, and then flowering. But autoflowers is that whole process packed into 75 days. So you can, if you apply nutrients that are slow release, and then you've got too much nitrogen hitting at the end because the mineralization curve was 75 days on that product, then you might be bummed. So a balanced fertilizer program, as with most plants, with heavy nitrogen at the beginning, as well as phosphorus and potassium to develop the flowering sites. And then just like with photoperiod cannabis, toning it back on the nitrogen a little bit towards the end, but less than you'd think.
Yeah. So general rule of thumb: more nitrogen than you would be feeding your photoperiod, pretty much throughout. But like Ryan said, you tone back a little bit towards the end, and I'd say the end would be the last 21 days. And then you're increasing, you're heavier on the potassium over that last, we'll say, third of the flowering cycle, of the entire cycle.
Let's say I plant my autoflowers right next to my, regular photoperiod plants. Will they cause my full-term plants to initiate early flowering?
We've had that question asked, and we wanted to address it here. That no, they will not cause your photoperiods to flower.
Okay. How long does it normally take before autoflower plants can be harvested?
65 to 85 days. I'll speak for the CBD side. We're at 68 to 77 days from emergence. So you'd probably put 5 extra days on that from sowing. If now that would be for we'll say April 1st to November 1st. But if you're planting out of season where the light levels are lower, you're going to add on average 15 to 20 more days. We do have some experience with say sowing in November and sowing in January to try to get a crop out of season. If you're not using light assistance on that, or extra grow lights, you're gonna take a lot longer to have that plant actually develop.
Okay. So what can you expect in terms of biomass yield for each plant?
CBD side, we say 2 to 4 ounces per plant.
Yeah, same for THC side. But what's interesting is these growers that planted in February over here in California, and mostly in the southern part of the state, they're looking at 90 to 95 day harvest windows. And they're looking at much larger plants because they grew vegetatively longer before flowering. And they're looking at 4 to 6 ounces per plant.
So what kind of per acre yield can you expect?
The range we put out there is between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds of biomass per acre. And the other thing to consider is that you can run 2 crops in a single year, and some people can even pull 3.
Yeah, I think planting densities will obviously dictate exactly how much. Steve and I were talking about this year with the hemp, with some of the trials. We're going to try to find the wall there, so to speak, and we're looking at throwing densities probably upwards of 50,000 per acre just to see, and maybe even pushing it even further. I mean, maybe we go to 100,000 on just a small section just to actually see what each strain can handle in this specific climate.
So how much of the crop can you use as finished trimmable flower?
We usually have like a 60% yield on biomass, and in some varieties it could be 50%.
With the hemp side of things, we have 2 strains that are between 25 and 50% for smokable. That would basically be the top flower, the top cola. We have another strain that's closer to 90%. It all comes down to the density of the flower. Our CBD strains are they're kind of a dual purpose. You can take the top colas out for the smokable, and then the rest would be better suited for extraction.
Okay.
The other thing we've done is just harvest tops and then let the remaining flowers on the plants mature. We get way higher yields and much more trimmable flower that way. So if that's what your market is, it can definitely be worth that extra labor.
It's a good idea. So what can people expect in terms of total cannabinoid content from autos?
Yeah, so our THC autos are coming in between 17 and 22% by variety, and an average around 19 and 20 THC.
Okay.
And our CBD varietals are 10 to 12% on the top 2 inches. CBD, obviously, everyone's concerned about testing and staying compliant. And then the average biomass is going to be between 7 and 9%. That's the average of the whole plant, not just the top 2 inches. And I think maybe the reason why we've you'll see you might say, well, why is the THC higher compared to the CBD autos as far as cannabinoid content? And the simple answer is we've been working longer on the THC varietals and breeding them.
Well, that's the end of my list of questions. Do you guys have anything else to add to what we've already talked about? I have one question from an audience member.
Well, maybe Eric, I'll just chime in here while people are thinking, and I'd be curious to know if anybody listening today has tried to plant via no-till method, That's what I do, and that's what I'm attempting to perfect. It's something that I've been able to do in my other crops, but there's a learning curve with everything. So just curious if anyone else has tried that. From the context of soil health and everything, it certainly is the way to go. I understand the challenges of it, but I'm just curious if anybody else has tried it or if there's any questions related to that.
We do have a question from a little bit earlier in the discussion from Daniel. He's curious about how autoflowers handle the heat, like in the air temperatures.
I think they love the heat, Daniel. Of course, the one time where they might not like the heat is if you're in a transplanting method and you're actually on the day of transplanting. Of course, you want to avoid transplanting middle of the day when it's super hot. Transplanting late in the day or early in the morning is better. But as far as heat and lighter is what's going to ripen these autoflowers. So they're gonna soak it up and love the heat.
They do. They love the heat. What we've noticed is that nighttime temperatures have a huge effect on their growth, which is interesting because one thing I wanted to add to the discussion was the genetic history of autoflowers, which is Cannabis ruderalis, and that's a species of cannabis from the Arctic region of Siberia, which had to grow and make flowers and seeds in a very short period of time before the freezing temperatures came back. And that's why they flower independent of the photoperiod. Additionally, they're growing during a time of year up in that latitude where it's mostly daytime, for 20 hours a day. And down here, we don't have day lengths like that at all. But so the autoflowers historically had very short night hours. And as we know, there's a distinct process of photosynthesis that occurs at night where the plant is taking all the energy it made during the day and distributing it throughout its body. And so they just love warmer night temperatures. So when you're thinking about when am I going to plant, just consider your nighttime highs as well.
Steve, we have a response to your question. Sasha says they only plant directly into the soil. And let's see, there's another question from Daniel. What type of planter was used by Steve for direct seeding? I would think that a Monosum vacuum planter would work well.
So I have actually used both a monosem, which is actually probably one of the best ones out there for seed singulation for smaller seeds. And monosem is the only company, to my knowledge, that actually has a hemp seed discs. But again, I also have a Kinsey, which is pretty standard out there alongside John Deere and some other ones. And I'll give you a little bit of a trick here. If you use sugar beet plates, sugar beet seeds are similar size, around 2 millimeters is the size. Sugar beet plates can be used for hemp, except for one thing. There's too many holes in a normal sugar beet plate for if you're into that 10 to 15,000 seeding range. You can't run your rotations slow enough to get distances on your in-row spacing to 10 or 12, 15 inches or whatever. So what we've done, and this is the trick, we'll crazy glue shut half the holes. Just crazy glue or epoxy or something like that. And those of you who are familiar with these type of planters probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. That's what we did with ours. And I doubt if Kinsey or John Deere is going to be coming out with a hemp plate anytime soon. Although I have been given already a prototype from a third-party vendor who is making hemp seed discs for the Kinsey type planters and the John Deere type planters. So we're going to see other companies to start to provide for that niche need that we have out there. But yeah, monosem, if you have one of them, they're definitely one of the best.
Question from Alvaro. Do you have problems with hermaphrodites during these high density planted fields?
Yes, there are. It is a concern in the genetics, in all autoflowers. That's why paying close attention for our hemp genetics between day 40 and day 50 is when the males are going to show across the board on our 3 different genetics. It's always good to keep a watchful eye out if herms are going to come out. Usually seen in a stress event, most often lack of water. We provide our growers with cut sheets that help for them to reference the process that they're going to have to walk their fields during that time to make sure that they're going to rogue out anything that's going to turn into a male.
Joe is asking about how much lower of a yield will you see with autoflower seeds compared to typical seeds. I think we talked about that earlier. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
2 to 4 ounces of plant. Do the math on planting densities per acre, and you'll come up with pounds per acre.
Okay.
Bear in mind that you can plant 2 crops in a season.
Cheryl she's a cannabis breeder in Northern California, trying a few autoflowers for the first time this year. Sour Kush. They are feminized seeds, so unfortunately no males for me to make more seeds. Will I get autoflower results if I use an early photoperiod male pollen to make seeds?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Scotty wants you to touch on the pots that you mentioned, the Ellie pots. Can you talk more about what you're planting in?
You can Google that, Scotty. Ellie pots, ELLE. You Google that, you'll see pictures from the company. They've licensed, I think, the technology out to many different folks. I think across the world, be a floating medium, floating potting soil.
We're using grow coons this year. Got to get them from Europe, but they seem to take better to the field than the Ellie pots in our experience and other growers we work with. But the difference is that you've got to put these little nets into the trays by hand and fill all of your trays, whereas Ellie pots come pre-filled, and that takes a long time. It's meticulous.
Yeah, okay. Ellie pots are very, very useful. The one negative to Ellie pots would be that when they dry out, they get very they firm up. They're a little hard. It takes longer to put the seeds in. But they're we're going to say 2 to 5 cents a piece, depending on your volume that you're buying. Probably even less than 2 cents a piece if you're buying quite a large volume.
Dale is asking if anyone has ever used center pivot and pushed nutrition through it.
I have not, but I know that Dale is going to be doing that this year with using Monty's nutrient blend. It's something that I am familiar with down there in the Delmarva Peninsula. A guy that Steve and I know well, John Daffin, is down in Queen Anne, Maryland, and he's seen center pivot. It works well. I think a lot of genetics are grown that way out in Oregon and Colorado and out in the West. For our purposes of direct seeding, we're just going to pay attention to that as far as watering them in right away. You with a center pivot, you just want to be careful you don't form a crust on that soil right after you direct seed.
I'll just build on that a little bit, Joe. You're exactly right. It would be better to put it on water 2 days before and then plant into moist conditions than to plant in dry and then irrigate immediately to bring it up. Now, there's some times where you have to do that. It's the crusting issue on, I'll just say in the context of agriculture, rather weak seedlings, and it's nothing against autoflowers, it just is what it is. Crusting is your biggest enemy. So you have to try to manage around it. Now, sometimes you get natural rainfall and it's perfect. You don't need to do anything. But I would suggest that if it's dry, if you could irrigate first, and then as soon as it's fit to plant, and hopefully there's enough moisture there to germinate that seed, it pops, then you can irrigate again. Now that's theory, but you want to set yourself up for success, and that's what you need to do.
Okay. So I think we've got time for just 3 more questions. Michael wants to know, how do you harvest?
Steve, take that one.
Well, Michael, yeah, we're working on that. There's always by hand. That doesn't appeal to a lot of us who are thinking acreage here. One thing I'll tell you though, if those of you are on here and are small scale, the nice thing about autoflowers is they're easy to handle. So that is a plus, I will have to say. I would say we're working on various harvesting methods. One of them that is intriguing us, and this is for larger scale, is to use the Shelburne Reynolds stripper headers that are popular out for combining wheat, particularly in dryland areas of the Midwest. And just the way the mechanics of that work, it's basically does a pretty good job stripping off the biomass in the fields without ripping the plants out. So you can go through and it'll strip off the biomass and the leaves. The challenge we're faced now is, what do you do with it once it's stripped off? Because we don't have an existing piece of machinery that can handle that, I'll say wet or field moisture biomass. Standard combines aren't able to handle that. We could also put one of those heads, harvesting heads, on a forage harvester. That's possible. You'll probably have to do some major work to make them made up to be able to work together. And then you could blow the biomass back into like a silage wagon. So a silage wagon is perfect, but I just feel we might lose a little bit of some CBD or terpenes or whatever. It depends where your end product is in that blowing action going back into a wagon. So I prefer that we strip it off and have a belt taking it back into some sort of a wagon. Those are some more things that we're going to be working on this year, but that's something that we're looking into. You could also cut with a direct head on the combine and strip it off that way, but we're a little concerned that the shorter stemmed autoflowers, we may get too much stem in our biomass. We did test direct harvest last year on photosensitive varieties that are 4 to 6 feet tall, and it worked great. We did not test autoflowers through the combine. So that's something that we'll be looking into this year, and looking forward to playing around with a few things, and hopefully we'll come up with something.
Okay, thank you. Couple of questions here about the feeding cycle and what organic nutrients you would recommend. It's 2 separate questions.
It really depends on your soil conditions and what nutrients are in there. In general, we do feed liquid nitrogen at the very beginning, and we're using a fish hydrosylate product, 1611 or something like that. I'm using sulfate of potash, phosphoric acid, yeah, our soils are very high in phosphorus and potassium already, so we focus on nitrogen.
Okay, great. And then last question here about post-harvest. What are the best methods for bucking and leafing biomass? Is it done in the field, after drying? Are folks harvesting whole plants? This is Amy. I guess she's in California, and they're growing a 1/4 acre before our photoperiod plants. Thanks, she says.
Yeah, so it's different for, hemp versus the THC and what your end use is. So a lot of people are planting large acreage of our autoflower seeds for biomass, specifically to just go to extraction. If you're growing it for flower, smokable flower, you need to pay extra close attention for the males and for any herms. So look closely. And then, so how do we harvest? Well, that's a work in progress. Like Steve was saying with the combines, we go out and we do it by hand. And I pick the tops first and then wait 10 days and then harvest the rest of the plant. We're bucking in the field with this product that clamps on a 5-gallon bucket, and you put the stem down through it and pull backwards, and all the flowers fall off. For the tops, we're keeping them, 6 inches or so, and then drying them like that. We leave a little bit of leaf on there so we can rack them so you don't get any pancaking. and we're drying in a rack system using an eye dry. We've done the hanging. We've done, we've tried every way under the sun to make it efficient, and it's hard when you have a lot of material to dry all at once. I don't recommend doing, if you've heard people doing shipping containers and building them out, I don't recommend that. If depending on what climate you're in, putting up a hoop house and using panda plastic and just hanging in there is just ergonomically, if you've got the space and you want to go low tech, I would do that.
Okay. So that pretty much brings us to the close of the webinar. Do any of our panelists want to add anything?
I got a question here, if I could, to Ryan. Maybe you mentioned about nitrogen, and if you said it, I must have missed it, but do you have an approximate need for nitrogen? What is the pounds per acre to grow autoflower hemp? And that's, again, the total pounds, and we have to factor in, our soil quality and everything. But if you're asked the question, how many pounds of nitrogen does it take to grow autoflower hemp?
We're applying 200 pounds per acre.
Yeah, that's what we're applying to, 200 pounds per acre, and we've pushed it to 300 pounds and found the wall at 300 pounds. So slight burning of the leaf tips, so you can pull back a hair from there.
And that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you all for listening. Special thanks to Joe Ullman, Ryan Power, and Steve Groff for participating in this. I will have the answers to these questions in text form on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com, so please check that out. I hope your season is off to a good start considering all the crazy pandemic stuff that's happening. I hope you and your family are safe and healthy. And I do appreciate you listening to our show. I know you've got other podcast options, and I do appreciate that you spend time with us. My name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper. You can check us out online at lancasterfarming.com or follow us on Instagram at LFPodcastHemp. If you know someone who you think would make a good guest on the show, send them my way. You can always email me. Send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com or call and leave me a message, 717-721-4462. All right, thanks again. Until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper. Episode 87 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2020 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tinbird Shadow.
Industrial hemp.